All right, I'm recording this video for Sunday, and part one I'll actually link to below because it kind of sets up the idea of decluttering a version of yourself or changing your vision of who you are and how that can make us let go of either physical things are in our environment that don't line up with who we are, or digital things like courses or programs or things that we're trying to pursue which just aren't in line with where we are now. So the second part of this is something that Leah, you and I talked about last week, and that is when you have a goal, you need to decide basically daily, and sometimes multiple times a day, what you're willing to sacrifice to get to that goal. So in really simple terms, let's say that you've got a kid, they get a few dollars of pocket money each week, and they want a bike. And you say to them, okay, well, you're going to have to save up, $50 to buy this bike. And that means, you might be saving for 3 months to get the bike. Well, every week when the kid gets their pocket money, they have to decide if they're going to be someone who gets candy and they would get instant gratification for that candy, or if they're going to hold on to that money because they want the bike. So I think of this when I think of entrepreneurs who say, I'm going to write this amazing book, and I know exactly what I want to talk about, and it's going to be so inspiring. But day after day after day, they're not doing those things that they need to do. They're not contacting agents, they're not researching publishers, they're not writing sample chapters, they're not doing anything that they need to do to get that book published, or even self-published. They're not finding their own editor, they're not writing the first draft. They've just said forever, oh, I'm going to be this great author, but they're not actually doing it. And so in times like that, when you realize that every day when you're making the decisions of how you're going to invest your time, how you're going to invest your money and energy and attention, you have to decide what's more painful. So is it more painful to sit down and write a query letter to an agent and face getting rejected by that agent because they don't like the idea of your book, or they don't like the size of your audience, or they don't like you? Or is it more painful to give up your dream of being an author? And we have to do this in every circumstance. So one of the practices I do is I ask people to get into the mindset of where they want to be. So people close their eyes and they say, I'm living on the beach in Hawaii. I have a gorgeous mansion. My family is well taken care of. And we have fresh, fruit and bouquets of flowers, and this is exactly how I want to be living my life. And if they have an emotional connection to that goal, and they also know what they need to do to get to that goal. One of my clients, for example, was saying she was going to have to earn and invest $500,000 in order to make that her dream, to live in Hawaii with her family. So every day you have the choice, am I going to go through the discomfort in this moment to do what it takes to get the work done to get to that goal, or do I give up the goal? And that's something that only you can decide, because sometimes we've had these ideas of what we want, and then we realize, oh, that cost is actually too high. I don't actually want it that bad. And that's okay. It's okay to adjust your goals. It's okay to adjust your expectations, but it's really, really dangerous and damaging to say that you want this thing and to not be willing to work towards it. So if there's anything in your life that you want to achieve, anything at all, do this practice right now. Consider where you want to be, the person you want to be, the type of expert you want to be known as, the website you want to have, the income you want to achieve, the family that you want, and really close your eyes and pretend that you're living in that reality. And then ask yourself, in this moment, if the things you're going to do today to get there are worth it. Is it worth the discomfort? Is it worth the hassle? Is it worth some frustration to do the things now to reach that goal? And if it's not worth it, then maybe you need to adjust your goal. So this actually happened last year when I have been writing since I was a kid. I probably still have those tucked away in a memorabilia box of these terrible stories that I would write. I've always been a storyteller. Super embarrassed when I was 8 years old to win best storyteller at summer camp, because I was just What if nobody likes my stories and they're just humoring me? But I've always known that I would be a writer. I would be writing things. And even though I've done some fiction for fun, I've never published it. And last year, I knew it was finally time to be publishing my nonfiction. And so that's what I did. I worked in 2015 for 30 days to write 50,000 words of the first draft. I hired an editor. I spent a lot of money on editing and design and websites to get it all set up. I submitted this first draft to an editor who I was terrified would rip it apart. I got back the edits and I went through them and made updates and changes and stood my ground where I needed to. I worked with a designer. We did everything we needed to do to launch that book because I was at the point where it was more, it was worth giving up my free time and the effort and the money to make that happen than to change the dream of not being an author. So once you get that through your head of it's more painful to stay where I am than to move forward, that's when you can really get past any of those barriers. If you do have those barriers in place and you're not working to overcome them, it's possible that you don't actually want the goal as much as you say you do. It's also possible that you haven't fully realized the sacrifice that you're making. So one last example, let's say this came from a friend who, they had this perfect vision of getting married by a certain age, and having so many kids, and living in a certain area, and having this idyllic life. But they were terrified of dating. And so it was just this humorous thing to me of like, well, how are you going to get that goal that you say you want so badly if you're not willing to do the steps to get there, which would involve meeting someone you could marry and have kids with? Because for this person, they didn't want the kids without the marriage. So it seems ridiculous, right? Well, if you really want to get married and have kids and live on a ranch, you gotta go try to find someone to marry. So it seems really silly when you think about it that way, but I look at the entrepreneurs who say, I want $1 million business, I want to be on Oprah Super Soul Sunday, I want to be in the New York Times, but they're not doing any of the things that they need to do to get there. And maybe it's a case they don't really want it, and maybe it's a case that it just hasn't sunk in that every day they're not doing the work that is required, they're pushing their goal aside, and they're saying, I don't want you enough, or I'm not going to do the work. So, like I said, this is kind of a part 2 follow-up to yesterday's video, but I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments, and if you are working towards your goal, how you keep motivated to reaching it.